Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today, I continue bringing you the story of Hoai and Hung, a story that remains unfinished, filled with breath-holding moments and emotions pushed to their very limits. In the previous episode, after a long night of losing contact, Hung rushed into the forest to search for Hoai. Without hesitation, without time to think about himself, he followed every fragile trace left behind among tangled paths and rain-soaked leaves. And then, deep in the forest, Hung found Hoai unconscious, her body covered in wounds after hours of being lost in the harsh wilderness. In that moment, his heart clenched tight. With no other choice, Hung lifted Hoai into his arms, gathering every last bit of strength he had left, struggling to find a way out as his breathing grew heavier and his steps slower. In the treacherous depths of the forest, the road ahead was uncertain, and time was not on their side. Towering trees blocked out the sky, the light filtering down only in faint streaks, enough to see, but not enough to guide the way. The forest seemed to close in, vast yet suffocating, turning every step into a gamble. Hung could feel clearly that the weight in his arms was not only Hoai's body, but also fear, responsibility, and the haunting thought that if he slowed down even a little more, he might lose her forever. In the mist-covered mountains, there was a deep cave where stepping inside felt as though darkness itself swallowed every breath. It was cold, damp, and completely cut off from the outside world. No sunlight. No wind. Only a chilling silence stretching endlessly, as if time itself had been trapped between the shadowed rock walls. Hoai was there. She sat with her back against the icy stone, the cold seeping through every inch of her body, leaving her already exhausted form even weaker. Her hands trembled so badly she could barely hold her phone, her fingers stiff and unresponsive. The weak light on the screen flickered, bright one moment, dim the next, as fragile as a tiny candle before the invisible wind of despair. The battery was draining, each percentage dropping slowly but mercilessly, every decrease cutting into her heart, reminding her that hope was fading along with it. Around her, only the steady sound of dripping water echoed in the enclosed space, repeating over and over until it became tormenting. The damp, moldy air clung to every breath, burning her throat and leaving her dizzy. Ahead lay only darkness, so deep that Hoai could no longer tell where the path was and where the cold stone walls stood. She feared that if she closed her eyes even for a moment, when she opened them again, everything would be gone, and she would never find her way out. Hoai was afraid. Afraid of the darkness closing in from every direction, leaving her no space to escape. Afraid of the suffocating silence, where there were no voices, no replies, only the frantic pounding of her own heartbeat in her ears. Afraid of being left alone, cut off from the familiar world, as if every connection had been severed. That fear did not erupt violently. Instead, it crept in slowly, quietly, clinging to every thought, every breath. It made Hoai curl into herself, hugging her own body as if searching for the last bit of warmth in this freezing place. In that moment, she could only sit there, between darkness and fragile light, between faint hope and despair rising little by little. But just as desperate thoughts began to rise, tightening around her mind like a dense black wave, Hoai forced herself to calm down. She could clearly feel her heart pounding wildly in her chest, her breathing quick and shallow from fear and exhaustion. She gently closed her eyes, letting the darkness envelop her once more, then tried to take a deep, slow breath, as if gathering every last bit of strength she still had. In that moment, all the sounds around her seemed to fade away, leaving only the sound of her own heartbeat and a single thought echoing in her mind. She whispered softly, so quietly it was almost meant only for herself to hear. "Out there. Hung and Tony are still waiting for me." That simple sentence felt like an invisible rope thrown down into a deep abyss, pulling her back from the edge of surrender. Hung's image appeared vividly in her mind, his worried face, determined eyes, hands always ready to reach for her no matter what. And then there was Tony, the small child with a pure, innocent smile, who always waited for her to come home after long days. Those images overlapped and intertwined within the darkness, becoming a kind of unseen light, one that could not be seen, yet was strong enough to keep her standing. Hoai told herself, each word resounding in her mind like a vow. She could not give up. She was not allowed to give up. Not now. Not here. She had to live. She had to return, not only for herself, but for those waiting for her outside. That thought made her straighten her back slightly, even though her body was still trembling from cold and exhaustion. Though her legs shook with every movement, though she had no idea what awaited her ahead, Hoai began to walk. Each step was slow and cautious, as if a single misstep could send her collapsing onto the icy stone floor. One hand traced along the damp rock wall to guide her way, feeling every crack and rough surface beneath her fingertips. The other hand gripped her phone tightly, her eyes fixed on the faint light still glowing on the screen, clinging to it like the last fragile strand of hope. Day 1. She walked and walked, yet all that lay ahead was still rock after rock. Cliffs followed endlessly, with no clear end in sight. The space seemed to repeat itself without limit, leaving her to wonder at times whether she was truly moving forward, or merely circling within her own fear. Each time she stopped to catch her breath, the cold seeped deeper into her body, reminding her that she could not afford to stand still for too long. Day 2. Hoai remained trapped in that cold, a cold that not only surrounded her from the outside, but crept deep into her heart. Her body was exhausted to the point of collapse, her joints aching with every lift and step. She searched for a way through the darkness like someone wandering inside a heavy, black dream, where everything was vague, slow, and oppressive. At times, it felt as if time itself had stopped, leaving only her and the darkness stuck together, with no escape. By the third day, when exhaustion had risen to the point where she felt she could barely lift her feet, when every step required more willpower than physical strength, Hoai paused for a moment. She leaned against the rock wall, closed her eyes, and let her trembling breaths gradually steady. In her mind, that familiar voice rang out again, no longer a whisper, but clear and unwavering. At the end of this dark road, there must be light. Those words felt like a promise, like a pillar she could lean on to stand up once more. Hoai opened her eyes and looked into the darkness ahead, where she still could not see anything clearly. But this time, within that darkness, there was not only fear, there was also a quiet faith held tightly in her heart. She stepped forward again, slowly but without stopping, carrying with her the small hope that no matter how long the road might be, at its very end, light would still be waiting. Elsewhere, Hung was also living in a different kind of darkness, not the darkness of a cave or the deep forest, but the darkness of confusion, fear, and relentless thoughts with no way out. Hoai had disappeared. No message left behind. No missed calls. Her phone was completely unreachable, as if it had been swallowed up by the world itself. The moment Hung realized this, his heart seemed to drop straight into an abyss. At first came worry, then panic, and finally a suffocating sense of helplessness tightening around his chest. He called her name over and over again, until his voice turned hoarse, until all that answered him was the long, indifferent tone on the other end of the line. Hung felt like he was losing his mind. He rushed out of the house, running through every place Hoai usually went. From the familiar path leading to the stream, to the small trail she took whenever she needed to be alone. He asked everyone he could, neighbors, acquaintances, even people who had only met Hoai a few times. He ran from one end of the village to the other, his shirt soaked with sweat, his legs aching, yet he didn't dare stop. Every question he asked carried a fragile hope that if just one person said, "I saw her," everything would change. But all he received were shaking heads. The longer he failed to find Hoai, the more tangled Hung's thoughts became. Emptiness spread, pressing down on every breath. Her image kept flashing through his mind, her gentle smile, her kind eyes, the familiar way she stood waiting for him by the porch. He missed Hoai unbearably. That longing was not just love, but fear. Fear that at this very moment, she might be facing something terrible without him knowing. Hung cared for Hoai more than his own anxiety. He knew exactly what kind of person she was, gentle, quiet, always patient, never someone who made enemies. She was not the kind of person who would simply disappear without reason. That realization only deepened his unease. Even the most unreasonable possibilities began to creep into his mind, no matter how hard he tried to push them away. And then, that very panic dragged him toward the most painful suspicion of all. Hung thought of his mother, the woman who, because of stubbornness and wrong decisions in the past, had caused so many problems. Old memories he thought had long been buried suddenly resurfaced, sharp and painfully clear. He thought of the deaths that once surrounded his family, of unfamiliar yet threatening faces, of the times they had been cornered with nowhere to turn. All of it overlapped, forming a spiral of doubt that made his heart ache. Could it be, my mother again? That thought flashed through his mind, making Hung stop in the middle of the road. It was like a knife, filling him with anger while cutting so deep it stole his breath. He didn't want to believe it, thinking about it tore him apart. Yet the more he tried to push it away, the tighter it clung to his mind. Because in this situation, he could not deceive himself into believing it was all just a coincidence. Hung understood that if he didn't face this suspicion, he would never be able to continue searching for Hoai with a clear mind. She couldn't have vanished without reason, couldn't have disappeared without leaving a single trace. And if every lead pointed back to his family's past, then he had no choice but to see it through, no matter how painful the truth might be. In the end, Hung made a decision. He would follow the address to find his mother. He would demand answers. He would confront the very thing he feared most. Not out of blind suspicion, but because Hoai deserved the truth. At that moment, his worry for her outweighed every other inner conflict. Amid the chaos of his emotions, only one thought remained. No matter what the truth was, he had to uncover it. Because to Hung, Hoai was not just the woman he loved, she was the reason he kept moving forward, even as the road ahead sank deeper and deeper into darkness. When Hung arrived, the first thing he saw was not a tense or chaotic scene like the one he had imagined throughout the journey, but a strangely quiet space. His mother was staying in the home of a kind landlady, an elderly woman with a thin frame and gentle eyes. The small house sat tucked away in a quiet rural area, with old walls and a low roof, everything simple and rustic. The warm scent of a wood-fired stove lingered in the air. The faint aroma of boiled corn mixed with the steam rising from a pot of water on the stove. The soft bubbling of water, the crackling of burning wood, ordinary, everyday sounds, calm and peaceful. That peacefulness seemed to drape over the space like a veil, standing in stark contrast to the storm of emotions raging inside Hung. He stood there for a moment, unsure whether he should step inside as a son or as someone searching for answers. The landlady cared for Hung's mother in every small detail, each meal, each dose of medicine. From the way she poured water and supported her arm, to her gentle voice whenever she spoke, everything reflected sincere concern without calculation. Two women with no blood ties treated each other like sisters. The landlady had not only given Hung's mother a place to stay when she had nowhere else to go, but also given her a quiet space to look back on herself, to face everything she had done. In the painful story that followed, Hung's mother spoke openly for the first time about things she had likely tried to bury for her entire life. Her voice was no longer sharp or controlling, but slow and heavy, as if every word pulled up a piece of painful memory. She admitted that out of pride, out of outdated notions like social status and suitability, and out of fear of public gossip, she had tried to block her son's path. She feared being mocked, feared losing face, feared the whispers behind her back, and in that fear, she made the wrong choices. She said she had been wrong. She had asked bad people to interfere. She had borrowed money, thinking that once everything was settled, things would be fine. But it did not stop there. Interest piled on interest, debt on debt. Shady relationships dragged violence and threats along with them. Fear surrounded her day and night, pushing her into a corner with no escape. What she once believed was meant to protect her family ultimately became the very thing that drowned her in despair. As she spoke, her voice lost its former harshness. It lowered, broke, filled with belated regret. She could not bring herself to meet his eyes. Her hands trembled slightly, as if she herself lacked the courage to face what she had done. Now I've thought it through. I shouldn't have been so selfish, she said, her voice growing quieter. I need to look forward. I only want my child to be happy. Those words echoed in the small house, blending with the warmth of the stove and rising steam, yet they made Hung's throat tighten. He looked at his mother, his heart filled with both bitterness and bone-deep exhaustion. So much anger, so much resentment had built up over time, now no longer intact, yet not fully gone either. Before him was not only a mother who had caused harm, but also a woman who had paid a devastating price for her own mistakes. Hung took a deep breath, then asked directly, though every word seemed to catch in his throat, whether his mother had done anything to Hoai. The question fell heavily. His mother shook her head immediately, more decisively than words could convey. She said she had already done enough wrong, had gone too far, and would never commit another immoral act. She said this not to justify herself, but as a late admission of the final boundary she would not cross. Only then did the landlady gently speak up. She advised Hung to stay calm, not to let despair consume him. She said that someone searching in panic might exhaust themselves before finding what they were looking for. She urged him to seek help from the authorities, from colleagues and experienced people, because no one could carry such a burden alone in moments like this. Her words were not loud, not forceful, but they were enough to make Hung fall silent. Inside that peaceful little house, he stood between two extremes. On one side, his mother's past mistakes, on the other, the uncertain present where Hoai was still missing without a trace. And he understood that from this moment on, every decision he made would shape the road ahead. Hung left with his worry still intact, heavy, pressing down on him as if it had never been set aside. It didn't fade, didn't grow lighter, it simply stayed there, following him with every step. But at least at that moment, Hung understood one thing clearly: if there was even the faintest glimmer of hope left, he had to hold on to it tightly. Not just for himself, but for Hoai, and for Tony. He would not allow himself to give up, because behind him were two people who needed him to stay strong. And then, just when everything seemed to have reached a complete dead end, when every path of searching led only to an empty void, a very small, very accidental detail unexpectedly opened another direction. A young woman came asking about Hoai to get some medicine for her younger sibling, who had been running a high fever. Her voice trembled as she spoke, her eyes filled with worry. She said her sibling had been burning with fever for days, and their family was too poor to afford a hospital visit. In her panic, the only person she could turn to was Hoai, because earlier, Hoai had promised she would help. From that seemingly simple story, Hung learned something he had never expected, something that made his heart tighten painfully. Hoai had gone into the primeval forest to gather medicinal herbs for someone else. She hadn't gone on impulse, nor to run away from anyone, but simply out of compassion. Because she couldn't bear to see a child suffering from a high fever with no way to receive treatment. She quietly chose to enter the forest, carrying only her limited knowledge of medicinal plants and a heart that always placed others' pain above her own safety. Hung froze as he heard this. All the emotions inside him seemed to sink at once. The anger he had felt at being left behind during those suffocating hours of worry dissolved instantly, giving way to a sharp ache of tenderness in his chest. Hoai, that was who she was. Still the same person, soft-hearted, always moved by others' suffering, always willing to step into danger if it meant easing someone else's pain. Thinking of this, Hung felt love, sorrow, and the realization that he could not blame her, not even a little. Without hesitating, he set off immediately. Not knowing exactly which forest, not knowing which path led in, Hung chose to follow the mountain's edge, tracing little-used trails. He moved like someone chasing a thin beam of light through dense fog. So long as hope existed, he would not stop. At the same time, on the other side, Hoai finally reached the light she had prayed for throughout her days trapped in the dark cave. After 2 days of groping through darkness, feeling her way step by step with her hands and the last weak glow of her phone, she found a small stream. That stream led her to a narrow crevice, just wide enough for someone as thin as she was to squeeze through. When she stepped out of the suffocating darkness, the sudden flood of light made her eyes sting, and tears spilled out uncontrollably. She stood there for a long time, not because of pain, but because of the feeling of being alive. Because the sky was still blue. Because air still filled her lungs. Because she was still breathing. When she reached the foot of the mountain, where her phone finally picked up a signal again, Hoai's trembling fingers dialed the call she had held onto like a vow throughout those days. Hung, it's me. Just those 2 words, spoken through the phone, were enough to make Hung freeze in place. The entire world seemed to stop. Then he urgently asked where she was, his voice rushed and shaking, as if afraid that even a second's delay might make her disappear again. Hoai gave her location with all the clarity she had left. Hung rushed toward her, running until he could barely feel the ground beneath his feet. The moment they saw each other, everything burst open. Hung ran to her, calling her name again and again, as if to make sure she was really standing there, that this wasn't just an illusion after hours of extreme tension. Hoai barely managed to say, "I'm okay," before her eyes filled with tears. Her voice trembled as she explained how she had climbed the cliff to get the medicinal plant, then slipped and fell into the cave. Her ankle throbbed with pain, bruised and swollen, every movement hurt, yet she had crawled, stood, and searched for a way out for 2 straight days, simply because she refused to give up. Hung looked at the dark bruise on her ankle, his heart torn between concern and reproach. He said softly, his voice low, "Next time you go somewhere, tell me first." It wasn't anger speaking, but fear, the fear of someone who had once thought he had lost everything, simply because there was no chance to say a word to each other. When they got home, Hung wouldn't let Hoai lift a finger. He peeled bananas for her to eat, went out to gather medicinal leaves exactly as she instructed. He awkwardly crushed the leaves, warmed them, and carefully wrapped her ankle. His clumsy, unfamiliar movements made Hoai wince with pain, but also softened her heart. Because she knew there were kinds of love that didn't need words, only the frantic care shown when someone returns from the edge. That night, Hoai sat by the fire with her ankle wrapped in herbs, listening as Hung told her that Tony had smiled less these past few days, often sitting by the door, asking when his mother would come home. Hearing that, Hoai turned her face away, swallowing hard, her voice growing small as she said, "I'm sorry." Hung didn't say much. He simply replied with a short, calm sentence, enough to settle everything. It's good that you're home. The story closed with a gentle yet profound lesson. Sometimes, a single silence can turn into panic for those left behind. And sometimes, just one sentence, "Where are you going?" or "I know," is enough to keep a home from falling into the abyss of fear. Because family is not a place without storms, but a place where, after the storm, someone still runs to hold you tight and says, "Thank goodness, you're still here." Stay tuned for the next video to follow the story further.
Xin chào tất cả mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình nhé. Tạm biệt mọi người, hẹn gặp lại mọi người trong những video sau. Mình mới cắt tóc mái này, mình tự cắt tóc mái luôn mới về, không đẹp, một bên xéo như này, một bên cục như này.